Ask Me Anything panel. Feel free to ask any questions. We'd love to answer them. But yeah, I'll turn it over to you, Christian. Thank you, guys.
All right, awesome. Thanks so much. Hey, everyone. My name is Christian Calderon. I'm the CEO at GameJam. So happy to be here on this panel with some amazing experts. We are IDFA experts. Maybe if we think about like the taxonomy of experts, maybe we're on the endangered species list of experts. But we're going to talk about that, so that's awesome. So my name is Christian Calderon, CEO at GameJam. We have a top game now called 6ix9ine Runner. It's #2, so please download it so we can get to #1. And then I will pass it off to the amazing Carissa Gonzalez to introduce herself.
Thanks, Christian. Hi, everyone. My name is Carissa Gonzalez. I am the head of marketing at Pixelberry Studios. Also work on the app monetization side. And we are the makers of Choices. So right now I'm joining you from one of our multiple fantasy kingdoms. I'll pass it to Ionut for his intro.
Thank you, Carissa. Hi, everyone. My name is Ciobotaru, and I run product for the Verve group. We're a vertically integrated ad platform working mainly with brands in the US, but we also have a performance arm through Uplift. And my background has been mostly in the monetization space for mobile apps. With that in mind, I give it to Mike.
Excellent, thank you. Hey friends, Mike Brooks here, SVP of Revenue at WeatherBug. Like Carissa and a few others, I kind of manage both sides of the coin here with user acquisition and monetization. So I will, for most of the UA questions, kind of defer to the real experts on the panel, and then like Ionut and some other folks, focus a lot on the monetization side. So programmatic, direct sales, what is IDFA going to do to dollars in the door? That's a lot of where I've been spending my time lately. So we're very excited. WeatherBug is a mobile app that has 14 million monthly active users, almost completely in the US and growing. So we're happy to be here. Thank you so much. And with that, hand over to Deniz for an intro.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Mike. Hi, my name is Deniz Gezgin. I have just recently started my own gaming company, and per Christian's request, the name of the company is going to be 5x5 Gaming. We will focus on culturalized competitive games on mobile and maybe cross-platform down the road. But I'm happy to be here. I worked in many companies, small startups, big companies, Zynga, Machine Zone, done anything from engineering, except engineering, performance marketing, analytics, raising funds. Previous to this, co-founding this company, I was COO of a digital collectibles company. So happy to be here and sharing and discussing the questions.
Awesome. Thanks, Deniz, and congrats, 5x5. That's awesome. It's good. I'm so excited.
Yeah, way to go.
Congrats.
So do you guys want to talk first about, with regards to the IDFA, should we discuss supply first or demand? What do you think?
Do we have any requests from the crowd?
So far, oh yes, we have a request from a Christian Calderon. Let me ask the question. So let's start on the demand side. So with IDFA, maybe we should start with, when it goes away, what will happen to the BI stack? And maybe Carissa, if you want to discuss first, can I pass it to you again first?
Yeah. Obviously it's going to depend a lot on your product and what you currently have available on your side. At least for Choices right now, we're heavily working with the data team to make sure that we understand what are the right events that would mean a valuable user for us, right? And this is something that each team should look into their products based on their user experience, because obviously it's not going to be the same across the board. So that's one of the biggest areas, making sure that we update, we understand what are the events that will be correlatable to LTV, and also to understand what are the changes that we need to make in our kind of BI, like Tableau reports, etc. We're still trying to understand, and there's information coming along on how the relationships will be with MMPs as well. So I guess, I mean, I'll leave it to you guys to give input as well, but at least from our side, we understand internally what we're doing. It's more
Right.
kind of the outside, the third parties like Facebook, Google, and the MMPs that we're trying to figure out to make sure that everything ties in nicely together.
Yeah,
Right.
one thing I'd add to that is like, one of the things that's been a foundational change for us for the past 2 years has been this transition to what we call an app instance ID. So it's not like an IDFA, but you can think about it that way. So it's important that and I know we've talked about it earlier in the show, but transitioning your systems to an internal identifier is something, if you haven't done as a publisher yet, that's going to be the key to connecting with buyers. That's going to be, you know, how you look at your numbers and everything. So one of the tactical tips I would say is switch to an internal identifier that you create maybe on the install, and that would give you a place to start.
Got it. That's incredibly helpful. And Carissa, you mentioned the MMP. So like, what's going to happen to these guys? What's going to happen to the whole? Yeah.
I don't want to make any predictions on that. I want to see exactly kind of how Apple develops their relationship with the MMPs. Because right now there's a lot of the solutions are that the MMPs are going to wrap SKAT network within their SDKs.
Right.
But there's a little bit of trying to understand, will Apple require us to get opt-in in order for those SDKs to initialize at the beginning of the game? So I don't know if any of you have heard answers to that question. At least as far as I know, there is no kind of clarity on that yet. So that's kind of the biggest challenge. If we have to do the opt-in at some point to get that SDK to trigger, then it's going to make it harder for the MMPs to take on kind of that part of, right, like wrapping the SKAT network. And we're going to have to move to other solutions and not be able to depend on them, in which case they move on to just being data aggregators, right? Like calling the APIs and pulling that info in for us so that we can kind of pull it into our tableaus or reports.
But,
Yeah.
sorry, just
Go ahead.
To clarify,
Go ahead,
you're
Mike.
talking about like the IDFA being present much later in the scenario now. So because until you ask and say yes, you don't have it to surface to an MMP, even if you like, versus like off the bat right now.
Yeah, there was some terminology in which the SDKs cannot trigger if they're gathering user information. In this case, they kind of are, right? So we'll see kind of what happens on that.
Yeah,
I wanted to add. Go ahead. Deniz.
Sorry, yeah, I want to add one thing, because, you know, there are a couple of things that happened, you know, last, you know, week and a half or 2 weeks or so, right? Apple basically came out and said, hey guys, we're going to do this in 6 months, right? So it's, you know, let's not freak out. So there's a lot of talks going, I think, behind the doors. That is, you know, I would definitely use the approach of wait and see if you have if you're thinking about a substantial change on your BI stack. The reason that I'm saying that, you know, Facebook came out and said, oh, you know, the companies will lose 50% of their revenues. And then I'm sure in a couple of weeks, Google is gonna come out and say something, you know, indirectly negative about Apple's decision as well. So there can, you know, if startup world taught us something, one thing, there can be a lot of things happening next 6 months. So I would be a bit cautious on doing any major changes on the BI stack at this point.
Yeah, that was something we went through in the beginning, where all this information was arriving and we were trying to look at all the different parts of everything that was getting to our plate and trying to strategize around it. And then it got to a point where every day we were receiving new information and we were like, okay, let's take a step back and let's ingest all of this and just take some time. We have certain things lined up, but I'm not going to be asking our developers and engineering hours to be put into all of this if in a month we're going to have to change it all over again.
Yeah. And then there was a period MMPs were trying to freak out their customers. right? So if you think about it, like whoever MMP that you were using, when you talk to them, just because they wanted you to go to Apple and complain, they were like trying to freak out people. Oh my God, you're not going to be able to do retargeting. You're not going to be able to do, accurate ROI. We may need to take your iOS installs out of your dashboards, like all this BS, right? And now, like when I talk to, the couple of the guys on the MMP side, things a bit calm down. And I think they are having some intellectual conversations also with Apple, I feel like. So yes, sorry, go ahead on it.
Yeah, I wanted to add a bit of fuel on the fire, and that's related to Facebook, right? And how they look at MMPs and the FAQ that they send to advertisers, right? And they are like, okay, if you use the MMP SDK, we will pass on events, right? Installs. But if you use the Facebook SDK, we will actually do down the funnel event optimization, right? Just for Facebook SDK. So that's another thing to watch, right? There's no definitive answer now, but yeah, it just fits with your points in terms of wait and see, because there might be not just the Apple effect on MMPs, but the Facebook effect on MMPs.
Yeah. Facebook also, right there, if I understand correctly, they're kind of taking over the first 14 value update events on their version of how they want to do things. And at least to us, they haven't been clear on how they're going to be structuring that. Like, what event is it signaling for? The most obvious answer, it's purchase, because that's the one that almost everybody optimizes for on the kind of performance UA side, not focused on app monetization. But that's another, right? Like, let's see what they come and say to us, because it's, Facebook app events SDK and all of that jam.
Also, and actually, before we get, I wanted to ask a follow-up to Deniz there. You mentioned a point about some of the challenges that MMPs had mentioned. One of the things that I still struggle with is retargeting. Is that something that you think that you can think of a good solve for? Like, how do I activate first-party data when I don't have that key identifier of the IDFA?
Look, I think so. That's a great question. So I think I'll zoom out a little bit, and this move by Apple was a very Steve Jobs-like move, right? And now they are trying to dial it back a little bit. So there is at this current world, retargeting will be very hard, right? So unless someone passes an identifier, and imagine, like, I'm sure there are creative ways MMPs can come up and say, hey, look, we found a way, and this is the way to do it, or you're gonna have to do it on your side, whether there's via a login or some sort of an identifier you assign through your platform to those users, or you pull it from Facebook, right? So there are ways to do retargeting on certain segments of users that are identifiable by wherever platform you're getting them from. But I think there isn't a universal, a solution right now. And I think Apple's problem is, Apple is a universal platform. It's not like, if you either buy an iOS phone or an Android phone, it's the most ridiculous thing to come out and say, hey, by the way, I'm gonna not let you guys track my devices anymore. Yeah. That is the most ridiculous starting point, right? So I think maybe a bit too zoomed out answer to your question. There will be some adjustments to that statement. And that, in my opinion, will make retargeting much easier.
I was looking at the Apple website yesterday that has the information on these things, and they changed the communication that they have there. And it says SKAT network will also identify re-downloads, which helps advertising networks measure the success of re-engagement campaigns. So I'm pretty sure this is new, because I hadn't, as far as we knew, it was that no retargeting could be done.
I wasn't aware of that statement, but that supports my argument, right? So
yes, it does.
There is going to be a lot of dancing, as we say in Turkey. There's going to be a lot of dancing about that announcement for the next 6 months. So we'll see how it goes.
Yeah, for the next 6 months, and I could add even for the next 1 year, right? SKAD Network 3.0 will be launched. Maybe it will have some other capabilities, right? I don't think it's a maybe. I think it's which capabilities will be added based on the
Absolutely.
feedback and what they see in the market. And retargeting could be one of those. But that means retargeting moves in the Apple ecosystem, right? In the Apple ads and search ads ecosystem. So that would be another interesting point to see.
All right, so we have a question from the audience. The question is there any solution for influencer marketing? SK ad networks attribute it all to organic as of now. And I don't know who it's from, but this is the question.
At least from our side, the influencer companies that we've talked with, they are not integrated as ad networks with Apple, and they can't. So at least from our side, what I've understood is that we won't be able to attribute specifically to them.
Look, I think from our side, although we don't do UA buys in scale, I stopped figuring out what's the install coming from an influencer a long time ago. So, it's basically, we've done, and, I've spent quite a bit of money in different companies on influencer marketing, like in some cases, 7 figures a month, but we've always done it on a lift. So whatever method they were using before this, I don't think influencer marketing will be affected at all. They should just do it on a lift. Okay.
Yeah,
so.
just want to second that. Just want to second what Deniz mentioned. Instead of just the click attribution or whatever other attribution being currently used, just look at lift. Try to stabilize all other, let's say, marketing activities. I haven't seen it on influencers specifically. Back in the past, we did app installs via TV ads, and it's the same. There's not even a click. You need to just stabilize your analytics and then see the lift, and then go from there.
Yeah, the thing there is that they need to be scaled campaigns, like pretty big, in order for you to notice that impact on your baseline.
Right.
So if
micro influencers,
yeah, if you work with a company like Jet Fuel, for example, where their product offering is on like installs, so that's a little bit. In those cases, it's a little bit harder.
Yeah, but then so to answer that, or attempting to answer that, then you can do a lot of your assessment on a eCPI versus ELTV, right? So I mean, I know we're getting a little bit technical, but it's just I mean, there is a good and bad in especially answering this influencer ROI question. There are certain ways you can go at it, but if one is not an option, then, and if you're constantly buying installs, such as the company that you mentioned, then there are other things that you can do, like I mentioned, on the eCPI versus ELTV.
Yeah, I mean, arguably, if the influencer model tried to follow some kind of deterministic attribution model, they would be shorthanding themselves, because there's all this uplift that you're getting from the influencer. That's the whole point of using an influencer, So
absolutely, yep.
So we touched about this a little bit on the for demand partners and the ad networks preparing for iOS 14 and IDFA going away. What are their moves? Like, what are they doing? Facebook, Google, what are Twitter? How are these companies going to respond, do you think? From the demand side, from the on the demands for advertisers, like how?
I think, yeah, in my opinion,
so like
they're gonna just, yeah. Sorry, go ahead, Chris.
Like, for example, with Facebook, we know that they're pushing automated app ads, and so they're trying to push new products in order for advertisers. Do you think Google is going to respond with some kind of new similar products, or how will they respond to this new world that we're about to enter?
I think I'll have a quick short answer. It depends on the size of the the platform or the partner. So most of bigger ones will just say, oh, look, our awesome SDK, and everything that you're giving up by losing this stupid stuff with Apple's announcement, we can kind of, give you back 90% of it. So whatever the case may be, they're going to push people to either implement their SDK, or if the SDK is implemented, make other, checkboxes available so they can actually pass back stuff that they could be used as an identifier. So if you're a big social platform or a big, company like Google, or Twitter or Facebook. But if you're a small guy, I think things are going to be a lot tougher, right? So
right.
Yeah.
And for the advertisers, like who's going to win in this market? Like what kind of advertisers are going to win in a world where this is happening?
I mean, this is rich gets richer, right? So yeah. In my opinion. Sorry.
Yeah, I have maybe one thought there. I'm thinking the publishers or app developers that currently don't rely so much on user acquisition, or rely very little, let's say 20%, and everything else is organic, they won't be affected as much. I mean, this shift will actually not really impact their bottom line, while everyone or the app developers who really focus on their organic reach and growth, might stand to benefit because of all the reshuffling in the user acquisition space in the next 6 months. Well, in the next 3 months, probably not as much, but certainly beginning of next year, it will be interesting on that front.
And I think a little bit higher level answer could be, Christian, is whoever is not worrying about their monthly spend, but worries about their K factor because their organic installs or number of installs are increasing, would be the beneficiary. Meaning, right now, the only rich advertisers can do that. Like if you're so like Nike, right? So if you cannot identify your installs and you only worry about your K factor, although, I mean, there's some, other calculations that you're making in terms of ROI, I'm sure those companies do, or I think those are the beneficiaries, right? Because smaller guys and the guys that do a lot of optimization, they won't be able to buy installs at scale anymore, right? So if you cannot buy installs at scale anymore because you need to answer your investors on a every 2-week basis, that gives a lot more impressions to the bigger guys that does their calculation on, hey, it's November again, I'm gonna spend $60 million and let's see if I can get 150 eyeballs with this money. I mean,
but
so they'll pick it up on the cheap.
Point, to your initial point, I think we're gonna see who's nimble enough, creative enough, right? That's kind of
exactly.
That's what I was gonna mention. Like, if your team needs to be adaptable. Because basically from the UA side, if you're doing performance marketing, your way of doing UA is broken. You have to rethink how you're approaching it. And the teams that stay just looking at your cohort LTVs, it's going to be based on a very small amount of users, right? Depending on how you're building your stack. So I think the challenge there is, the teams diversifying their skill set and identifying, what other type of media buys can we do outside of this scope. I think it's great, honestly, for teams because it's challenging everybody right now in the industry to think in a different way. Right? Like, how do we look at CPM buys? How do we incorporate all of that? So it's pushing us from being this hyper performance focused on cohort levels industry to thinking more as, to a certain point as traditional marketing people. So that's kind of the challenges that I see there. If your team is stuck and your management as well are not able to kind of move past the cohort data and understand that things won't be the same and you won't be able to provide the same level of granularity, then that's going to cause issues in your growth as a company and for you guys to adapt to the challenges.
I feel like just economically, kind of on top of that, like that one of the things I can't get away from is that opacity leads to risk, right? That leads to risk in each of our iOS businesses because we don't understand quite how close we can get for, in a UA perspective. And then how does that turn into, like that, is that inherent cost? Like does once iOS 14 go into play, is an iOS install just inherently more expensive for us because we can't see that level of granularity? From a macro perspective, I can't get away from that. Like, I feel like my cost of UA, no matter what, will go up on iOS. Do you guys feel the same way?
That's the thing. That's why you need to look like one layer up. For us, we're trying to get more used to it, just get more used to looking at the overall numbers, including your organics.
Mhm.
Because yes, your CPIs are going to increase like crazy probably on some of the networks. your
So-
IDFAs are going to cut down like crazy.
This is actually a really good transition point, but I'm curious what you guys think about this. So if cost goes up, right, that means CPM's going up. That means the developers on the supply side should be making more money, right? Or does that mean the ad networks are getting more money? What do you guys? How does this affect the supply? The supply side. What do you think?
Less supply is filled.
This is a self-driven question, Christian. You're asking it for your own benefit.
Well, Christian, I might give an answer that you might not like as much. At least that's one theory, and that's okay. CPIs increase because we're less effective, but we're less effective because we're going to need to spread across a lot of impressions that CPI. So I'm not sure it will grow. I hope at best it will stay the same. It might even decrease, but I think competition between ad networks actually might help it, at least keep it at the current levels. That's the same.
Okay, no, you mean the CPMs for on the supply side you think will
supply
stay?
side, correct?
Yeah.
Yes, they will stay because you will need to spread and explore, right? So it's like,
right.
Yeah. So it won't be that the current precise targeting, right? You have maybe even a lower CPI and a high CPM because you can convert so well, but because you cannot convert so well, even if the CPI is high, you're going to need to spread. And I'm not sure if everyone will experiment in the same way. So we'll have to look at that. I'll add one thing. Facebook argued that they lose 50% of their targeting once they don't know the user anymore. Yeah. So, but that's a different story, and that's related to how Facebook runs, right? Facebook Audience Network specifically, which they run just for the users they know, while I would say the rest of the ecosystem is not that tied into, let's say, user level targeting.
So I would have to say that, as you know, putting on my publishing hat, that's in line with what we're expecting. Remember, we can kind of look at monetization on limit ad tracking today. Limit ad tracking is already 30% of our user base on iOS. So in the short term, because you can't do audience targeting, your CPM, like we're confident CPM is going to go down without an IDFA somewhere between 35 and 50%. So I don't think it was that bombastic of Facebook to claim that. Ionut, it looks like you have
That's what I meant. That's what I meant. Yeah.
Okay. So
Yeah.
we don't use Facebook Audience Network as a monetization source at all, but we also expect similar types of things with Amazon and Google and other folks with strong first-party data that they're leveraging off platform. So we see that as a risk in CPM in the short term. And then there's kind of an ad tech question in the midterm and the long term as to, can contextual things help increase CPM and provide value and either fill the gap or exceed what we were getting on programmatic? We, to be honest, as an industry, are not there. We're at the point where we're having interesting conversations, and maybe we'll get there by the time IDFA like this happens. But I think that in the short term, we're expecting a significant loss to that CPM. In the midterm and long term, though, it's those ad tech technologies and kind of that new generation of ad tech that I think is going to help us bridge the gap there.
Yeah, I just want to add one point to that, Mike, and that's quite in line with what I was saying and what we've seen as well for LAT across the whole Verve platform. And the point is about performance advertisers, so app install ads, and brands, right? I think the conversation is going there. And for Facebook, we know it's mostly performance, right? App installs. That's kind of their bread and business and has been for a few years. But what it's our case, and probably your case, as far as I know, it's mostly brand advertisers. And they do target audiences, but they also target a bit more broadly contextual. For example, weather app and the moments within the weather app are quite rich, and you can find similar apps. And now they are also looking into games and type of games and moments within the game. So I think for brands, is they never had the one-to-one, right? You don't buy a Nike shoe just from seeing a banner, right? You buy it later down the line. So yes, short term, there will be a hit because we need to re-educate them and we know how long that takes. But mid-term and a bit longer term, I think we're going to be in a much stronger position, right? Because they already require us, I don't know, a 30-pager on privacy and regulation. What do we do? User data and all of these things. So at least one less headache, change with another headache. Yeah, but I think the brand part might recover a bit faster than the performance part. Yeah, so I hope it's not going to be the full 50% apocalypse as this spreads.
I mean, it might not be a bad thing for me because all my ads are other games. So I wouldn't mind if more brands came in, to be honest. But no, that's super helpful. So we talked about Facebook audience network briefly, and I'm just curious. So like, what's happening? So the 50% drop is a pretty scary number, right? How are developers working with Facebook? How do they respond to this?
I gotta be honest, this starts looking like the beginning of the end of big first party and third party ad tech. I think this means that long-term Facebook audience network and even Google's audience network capabilities, like, it's not worth it. It's not worth the risk. It's not worth the legal. It's not worth the privacy headaches. And it's not worth putting a $90 billion search business at risk for $9 billion in display ads and DoubleClick. So I think this might be the beginning of that.
Just to add to that, not related to IDFA, but Oracle and Adobe, if I'm not mistaken, just pulled out of Europe because of GDPR and some looming. So that's just regulation. It's not platform just today. So yeah, I think it's reasonable to think that way, Mike.
Oh, that's good. So how about on the product side for developers, right? So we know that we have to show this the app tracking transparency notification. I know you talked about some strategies. Maybe you could discuss, like, you know, what is a good opt-in rate someone should be trying to achieve, and how can you kind of maybe improve that if you don't have that number?
Yeah, sure. And I'll kind of start with that one. You know, we're expecting to start in that 15% range like everybody else. One of the things I want to address, though, is people come to us and say, WeatherBug, you know what you should do? You should offer a 3-day forecast. And then when people opt in to the IDFA, they can get the normal 10-day forecast. And I've gotten that from a lot of people who, you know, let me give 2 reasons why I think that, you know, just to be clear, why I think the feature limiting thing doesn't work. One, it's counter to the mission of our app, right? We exist to help keep people safe. Everybody we put behind a wall is one less person we keep safe. But the other piece is more of a game theory piece, right? If we were the first ones to make that like pseudo layer of, you know, the Diet Coke version of the free app, people would leave en masse to our competitors, right? We're in the free app space. So I think when we're thinking about it, we're not really considering going down a feature change world, but from a product perspective, we are considering a different ad product world. So how can, for folks who don't opt into IDFA, can you show more video, more interstitials, perhaps things that require less IDFA specific targeting? I think that's more likely a world for us to go down as a mostly ad supported app rather than changing the feature functionality for different opt-in stances.
Interesting. No.
Mike, does that mean that there's a potential for you guys to not do the IDFA opt-in?
So we will only, if you want to track by Apple's definition, we will require app tracking transparency framework to be fired. And if it's a no, you know, it's a no forever.
Yeah, I think so. Just, sorry, go ahead, Carissa.
No, yeah, you can go ahead.
Yeah, and I mean, I'll look at this from a gaming app perspective. I think things might be a lot easier for us to get any kind of IDFA permission or any permission, because when you compare, you know, progression-driven apps versus utility-driven apps, you can actually give, you know, you can figure out what the carrot is for a person that is looking to have a fun time, right? And would like to get to level 2 or level 3 or level 4. So we can address this permission thing in the gaming apps a lot easier, in my opinion, than some other apps. Whether it's soft currency, hard currency, scrolls, you name it, right? So
It's still not clear whether we are allowed to incentivize, right? The ATT, I believe in one of the previous sessions, this was being talked about as well. So it's not sure if we can actually incentivize the users to it.
yeah, but
so
I
it's
mean,
not clear if it can be incentivized, but you can always adapt the soft pop-up and
The wording.
what is the soft pop-up. Yeah, I think that's super
I'm
important. So what we're working on as the first prior right now with the publishers we work with is actually the soft pop-up and how to convey the message the best way before actually calling this app transparency framework, and maybe calling it later if the moment is not the right one and they decide not to do it. So those are the kind of questions we're currently asking and trying to optimize.
Yeah, on our side, we've been testing placement through our CRM provider, which anybody, like, you should be able to do it through your CRM provider. And then what we're doing to just make sure that we're complying is that we're using the MMP do not track API call. So we're monitoring because we wanted to understand what opt-in rates can we get based on placement, and also what kind of impact does it have on the down funnel events as well. On the side of benchmarks, if it's something early on, I've seen on other areas, other apps also confirm that if they have it around launch, you're seeing around a 30% opt-in. But you also have to take into consideration what does that do to the down funnel events, like I mentioned before. And then the 12 to 15, 16%, I've seen that one as well, but it's kind of for placements further down in the funnel outside of the launch.
Because I would assume that in the onboarding is the worst place to put it, because the default is don't allow. So if someone already clicks yes to the 3 location or the 3 permissions of like location, et cetera, to use WeatherBug, their 4th yes would be a don't track. So we were seeing that as, from a behavioral economics perspective, that would put people in the no category real fast. So I'm surprised that that one had a higher.
That's why it's important that nobody makes decisions based off of other apps data.
Exactly.
Implement it on your site, test what works for your product, and then go.
Exactly. I think it's very different from a game, from a game-based, let's say, relying the harmonization on ads versus a game with IAP and the utility app based on, let's say, advertising, or a utility app, I don't know, for meditation based on subscription and things like this, right? Who might not even need it for advertising, but they might want to re-engage users to get them back to subscribe. So they actually need it after the fact. So I would say every app and almost every vertical will probably, and every business model will need to, to adjust, adapt, and test. I think test, coming back to being nimble, and
Which is good that we now have the extra time to do extra tests.
Doesn't feel like that much time though. I still feel like if we run towards the end zone, we'll just barely reach it as they launch it, no matter when it is.
Because the holidays, you already have 2 weeks at least that are knocked out of there.
Yeah.
Well, 3 if you count Thanksgiving in the US.
And just curious about the opt-in rate. So just have a question on this. So like, as my opt-in rate increases or decreases, what happens to my like, what happens to the CPMs? Like, does that go up or go down as the opt-in rate changes?
It goes. Sorry, Christian, please.
No, go ahead, and then
I was just like, it goes up. Like, I think there's a lot of people. There's a lot of people who are saying, I'm going to stop collecting because it's not worth it. But I hope, and I think I mentioned this in an earlier call, I hope so many people say that, because there's still going to be so many systems that rely on it, especially for targeting in the next 6 to 12 months, that everybody who stops collecting puts us in a position to have more for the people who need it. So it's not a long-term play, like it's not the future of ad tech, but it's a place to save a lot of short-term revenue.
Yes, it might compensate from the drop on the other side. Yeah, if you collect it and you're able to utilize it, I'm sure there's going to be an increase. Yeah.
Wow.
I would just to think about supply and demand and seeing, okay, the supply is now limited. This is the only place I can do certain, let's say, targeting or certain audiences. it needs to increase, right? Everyone will fight for those users. That's my guesstimation.
And then playing devil's perspective, right? So as a game developer, if people are targeting our users, then they're likely leaving to those games, right? So if I don't want my users to be targeted, and I don't opt in for IDFA, do you think that could impact my retention? Like, or equally, they're still going to advertise, and I'm still going to lose those users?
Just don't try and get around it in another way. That's what I would say, is like, if you're not going to do app transparency framework, like I've heard of people who aren't going to do it, but the almost always the next piece is, and this is how we're going to get away with it. So, you know, I don't think that's a real, like, I think long term you have to, if you're going to do tracking, you have to go within those frameworks.
There's something about not tracking. It feels kind of like, you know, that who does that benefit if no one's tracking? Like it may also benefit the network, right? Because there's lack of transparency, so maybe they could claim a higher margin.
They know things.
Maybe it benefits the developer in some way, or maybe it doesn't because of CPMs. I'm not sure, but it's an interesting question, because I guess you could look at it from both perspectives and pick a strategy on which way you want it to go.
I would add, if you're a huge developer, you might just not want to share that data, as you initially mentioned in the beginning. You already have a brand, right?
Right.
That could be something that you let's say keep in house at this point, and not allow it to be broadcast as it is right now. That's one thing, and keep it as your competitive advantage, and then just add more users, because you do have the IDFV, right? So to, I think, Deniz's point, the rich get richer. If you are huge, you have a brand with IDFV, SKR network, and the other tools, you might just not use app transparency. Though if you use a CRM, and that's still a question, right? If you do your email login, right? Not single sign-on, so not Facebook, not Google, not Apple, but just an email, so just your personal CRM, will that be considered tracking or not? That's another question.
Only if you share it with other developers for the purpose of targeting.
I'll be pinging you.
Across apps and sites, exactly. Across apps and sites.
Okay, so if you use it just
company.
Awesome. All right, so we have one last question, and then this is the last one. So how do the experts feel about these changes will increase or decrease the amount of fraud and the ability to catch fraud in our industry? So this question is about fraud. And anybody want to go, or?
I'm gonna refrain myself and not say anything until I hear someone else talk about it.
So I'll focus on one of the things that I'm concerned about that's a little more out there in the fraud world, a little bit further ahead, is that one of the things I see happening is, again, publishers finding ways to connect their first-party data into buying systems like DSPs and for advertisers. But as we surface that data, the ability to know if it's real, I think, becomes a big challenge. So if the world moves towards contextual and it moves towards this surfacing of first-party data into DSPs, how do advertisers feel confident that they're actually getting from a publisher what they say? That's kind of a whole new world of fraud as we go towards contextual, which we as a publisher see happening. That's one of the concerns we're thinking about, is how do we prove what we're saying is true?
Right. And so who do you think is committing this? In this instance, who's committing this fraud in this situation?
It would be people thinking that WeatherBug as a publisher would. So it's almost to enforce that the data that we are sending about what the weather is for this user or location or whatever it is,
So I'll make like very short comment. I think this will increase fraud because you just gave, multiple holes to fraudsters, right? So when there is when you introduce an unknown to an equation, which, if you are thinking to do fraud or manipulate the flow, I think this introduces, couple of more ways that you can fraud the system, in my opinion. I mean, I haven't really spent too much time about it because that's not my kind of business. So, but I'm sure this gives a lot more chances to fraud the system.
My thinking, so I would be the opposite here. I think it removes ways for fraudsters, right? You need to sign the clicks. You need to have this thing in SKAd network. There might be, I mean, there's always ingenuity there, but I think it closes some windows, and it might open some harder windows in terms of first-party data and what Mike mentioned. That would be, but it makes it more complicated. So what I'm saying, yes, there might be some holes that are open, but it will be increasingly more complicated to do fraud in, let's say, the mobile programmatic ecosystem. We do have on top of that, as TXT, sellers JSON, supply path optimization. We are every month, I feel, every quarter, getting better at eliminating the waste, which I consider fraud, and the non-value adding players. So I think this is a step in the right direction. But again, yeah, there could always be creative guys. If we look at all the reports, there was an SDK recently. I think, yeah, some security company caught it, and we see Pixelate's reports. Yeah, we'll see how that goes. But I think there's going to be less fraud. That's my take. And Mike, to your point in terms of first-party data, I think also the conversation needs to be, okay, this is the publisher, this is the data, with the advertiser understanding and being, let's say, managed, or how to say, yeah, managed. I don't know the right word there, but
that might be the right word, because like the data is packaged with the inventory at this point, kind of in the old school way, right? They're
exactly
not
in the old
separated.
School, exactly. They're not separated anymore. And once you already have the trusted relationship, I actually think in the long term it will be a good thing. And I mean, unless the publisher is engaged in fraud, I think there won't be. And yeah, or maybe I'm just wishful thinking.
I'm glad you said that, Ionut. I was thinking, I've been keeping quiet on that subject because my thought is that, since it's more direct, the relationship with Apple as well, there's certain areas that are limited, but never put it past app fraud people. They're very smart people. They'll find a way.
That's why I added that part at the end. We've seen them time and time again being extremely creative.
Yeah. They'll figure a way around.
Okay, cool. We have a couple more questions here. So this one is from Nan, and this is going back to the app tracking transparency. Which placements would you like to add in the app or game to experiment the opt-in rate? And I'm assuming they're talking about the opt-in rate for the ATT, app tracking transparency.
At least from our side, my recommendation is check what placements make sense for your product. We can talk all day here about what works for our products, but if within your user experience, a placement at, if ad revenues are not that big for you, or you don't have that many ad units in there, then it doesn't make sense for you to implement ATT before you get a rewarded ad, let's say. So it's gonna depend on your product a lot.
To second that, I would say depends definitely on the product, but check in the App Store some of the products available in Europe, because we already have GDPR, and you're going to see some creative examples, or VPN your way into Europe to see how we pop up on every website. And check the Guardian, Washington Post. They are getting, and they've been getting increasingly creative across time to get their GDPR opt-in rates to 50% plus. Yeah, so they test in the App Store, test in Europe, test on the web. That should give you some ideas. But then
you can see it in California too with CCPA. They started doing that now on all the websites here. Yeah.
Yeah. On the game,
the business will be booming soon.
Yeah. For the game side of the question, I think I can be a little bit more specific. So there are certain things that you can actually score your users that do not churn and why they continue a session. So, going back to your data and analyzing your data and seeing what effects or what actions actually make a person play longer, or what action that makes a person not churn, and place your opt-in offerings around those actions. And I'll give you a couple of examples. We've done this quite heavily at Game of War and a couple other places that I've worked, and also Zynga Poker. So you could do, maybe it's a positive resource fluctuation, right? So you can do when a person wins a battle. You can do when a person receives something from a user, whether it's wood, stone, some sort of a soft currency resource. You could do when a person actually, receives some chips, or when we give them something for free. That doesn't mean, and that's kind of going back to the comment or the discussions we had about you can't really reward certain actions. I know that, but I think there are ways to get away from that or get around it. And I would strongly suggest that you look at your data and kind of test things and see what Apple does or they do not do.
So just to clarify here. So when you're talking about currency fluctuation, you're meaning like you would just kind of bonus, maybe give them a little extra currency just to make the user feel happy, and then ask them right after.
Yeah. Exactly. So things don't need to happen or tied into a certain action, right? You can ask right after that action happening. And what I'm saying is tie that to a positive outcome. And you can actually look at your data, and we've done this at, like I mentioned in a couple of places I worked. It could be within 15 seconds, which could be considered not rewarding, right? So you could, like, for example, in Game of War, there were certain situations where we could get a positive outcome or a click from a user where their wood resource increased or their troops resources increased. You can tie this to, there's a lot of ways to do this, and not all of them are considered rewarding from a perspective of Apple. And I would suggest, especially on the data analytics and data science folks who are listening, or if you're in charge of those teams, I would challenge them to find those situations, or have some sort of a scoring for people who do not churn, or who extend their sessions, or who log in for an extra session because something happened. And then tie in your rewards or opt-in options around those events within 15 seconds, 30 seconds. You can experiment. There's a lot of A/B testing you can do. So.
Yeah, just to add to that, so the A/B testing part, test also the message. Think of it as a creative right now. Test the message, test all sorts of variations of the message and the value exchange and what you explain in that. Because, yeah, just think of it as your best creative right now.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, so give you a little bit more specific example. So let's say Zynga Poker. Let's say you're playing in a 10,000, 20,000 hand, and you just won 4.5 million chips, right? And the messaging could be within 10 seconds, we can say, hey, you're doing awesome. Would you like to, approve our tracking and receive some more important news, or when your friends are online? Bam.
Yeah.
That's done. That is not rewarding, by the way. So this is one way to do it, right? And there are many situations like that your data scientists should be able to identify in your game.
So we won't prompt on rainy days, only when it's sunny.
It depends on, I like rainy days. You should prompt me on a rainy day.
Damn it. So now only rainy days. Only rainy days.
I also like rainy days, Mike. So if you segment me, I have the app. So if you segment me.
Hey, if you find out I'm checking my weather app on a rainy day, what are you going to do?
Yeah.
All right, so we have one final question, and this question is from Anonymous. It's a nerdy. I think they're an IDFA nerd because it's a nerdy question, so they're probably embarrassed about their name, but it's a good question. But they asking about the probabilistic attribution model. Without the IDFA, what kind of probabilistic model, measurement model, would you build in understanding user performance? So what kind of model, probabilistic attribution model, would you?
I think we're going to start hearing a lot more about eCPIs and eLTVs versus, partner-based CPIs and LTVs. So, or ROIs. So you're going to basically do a lot more hey, how many total installs I've gotten during a period of time? How much marketing have I spent? Did I break even on this? This is my like first reaction to that question, right? So that's kind of what I think will happen. It's going to be very high level, kind of like a carpet or an umbrella thinking, but that's, I think, what's going to happen initially.
So is the source of truth still the MMP in this situation with the, I guess, because you, and why would you want to use just curious, like, why would you want to use this model when you have, you know, SK ad network? Like, you know what I mean? Like,
that's why I think MMPs are in a tough run. So I agree with you. So I think they're in a very tough position. So they're going to have to use whatever influence they have within the next 6 months to dance around this announcement and see where we get to.
Or diversify outside of measurement.
So is the answer, so wait, hold on. Is the answer you would not use a probabilistic model? Is that your answer? Are you changing your answer?
Me?
Yes. You would not use one. You would not use
I would use a probabilistic model. No, I would.
Oh, you would?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, sorry. Okay.
We're all going to have to.
Because there is no other option, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think the question is, will you do it yourself internally, or will the MMP do that for you, right? That's.
I vote for doing it internally.
We will do it internally.
I vote an MMP.
So.
I know that's a hot take at the very end, but that's also because we're a very small user acquisition team.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay, awesome. And you know, anybody else on the probabilistic model and talking about how they would build that and measure user performance?
I think if you guys know, well, probably most of you do, the mobile def memo. So there's been some really nice articles on there on kind of how to build your UA models or examples of ways that you could approach it in, where you take certain amount of events that you know that are calculated towards, you know, a certain LTV or like probabilistic of it being a purchaser or someone that's going to watch an ad, and then assign monetary values to each of those to kind of estimate what the future LTV of the user is going to be. But it's a lot. I think there's a lot of research. There might be different ways that come up, but so far I think some of the suggestions in there are some of the best ones.
Awesome. Okay. All right, everyone. Well, thank you so much for your time. This has been an amazing panel. I've learned so much about the IDFA, and so happy that you've shared all this information with me. So I'll pass it back to Evan. I see he's got his camera on over there. And thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you, guys.
All right, thank you guys so much.
Everyone. Thanks, everyone.
We appreciate each and every one of your comments. But yeah, we'll head to the networking area. We'd love for you guys to chat and meet more people there. But yeah, once again, thank you all, and thank you all for coming to this session.
Thanks, everyone. This was fun.
Networking area.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
All right.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.